Hey, welcome to the Night of the Sun podcast, Session 3. This is the place where you come to hear some discussion about the Dungeons & Dragons 5e module, Night of the Sun. We're doing a walkthrough here. I am your host, Mad Hermit, and I'm the one going to be delivering all this news to you. And this is what you've stumbled into. At this point, since we're at Session 3, you are going to be utterly lost unless you have listened to the earlier portions of this. This podcast mainly just follows along the course of the module Night of the Sun to help DMs better make an approach and attack at running it for their players. And on that note, this is the point where I need to warn you about the spoilers. They are everywhere, hiding behind every corner of what will be discussed following this little intro section. And if you are a player and you would like to have the game presented to you, without any foreknowledge so that you can get the most out of it and, get the best sort of naked, raw reactions that you can possibly pull off, you will want to dive out at this point, because from here on out, it's just sticky with spoilers. Alrighty. I guess they're all out of the room now, so we can start. Intro section here still, though. I would like to step back a bit, talk a couple more things about what we discussed in Session 2. First thing I wanted to do is go in and make another addendum to my discussion of the sort of small town, I don't know how you would discuss it, the sort of biases. No, that's the wrong way to take it. Let's say just the attitudes of these small town villagers, this isolated village stock of people, toward any strange races that you might have involved in your party. So if you got like Kinku or Tabaxi or, I don't know, the Dragonkin or something like that. Those things are really gonna stand out. They're really gonna make an impact here. Little kids are gonna come up, try to poke them with sticks. I mean, it's gonna be tough for the villagers not to stop staring at them. They're gonna love seeing these wild things. It's gonna attract crowds once word gets around. So, they know that these races exist in their world, but they never get to see them. This is a really tiny village, and a lot of these people are going to be totally excited, especially the children, to get a look at some of these, strange, fantastical races that may or may not be involved in your PC party. If you have them involved, you want to play that up a little bit. There will be some negativity from the old-timers, from those set in their ways, of course. Don't avoid that. Run with that. Role-play that out. Meet that head-on. Let your players interact with it and, bristle against it, because that's what these things are good for. Role-playing games, at their most powerful, allow us to examine all these types of interactions. So that's exactly what we want to do. Do not shy away from that at all, I beg you. Besides, in the course of the adventure, these wild and somewhat intimidating or frightening characters that these villagers may or may not like one bit are going to get to win them over and save their bacon. So that's the best thing you want. You want to start from a negative place with a lot of people, and then you want to wow them and come up cherries, come up way above where they ever expected these races to be. By the time the PCs leave that village, hopefully they are loving the type of race that you brought in. Second thing I wanted to discuss just quickly, it might help you to know some of the influences, and I am guessing that most of you can already figure out the influences for this. So the number one influence for this module, at least something we're trying to drive for here, Ashael and myself, is the idea of The Thing, the movie, like the 1985 version or the original short story, which I highly recommend. That is such a great thing to use as a basis for kind of how you approach this adventure, because it's, a small group of characters in a really isolated situation, really closed off. Their ability to escape the situation is very limited. They're really stuck into a tight little confined adventure area. That's what we're shooting for with Night of the Sun, at least this first one, and it's what we're hoping that we achieve with it. So you want to play to that as best you can, and you're going to get a chance to, because at the point we are in these sessions, you have gotten the characters to the town and hopefully gotten them to the village. A couple of the things I wanted to step back at this point and discuss about the village, just things that I happen to overlook but that are actually important. As you're giving your initial descriptions of the village, You don't need to really press this or push it because we don't want to give away too much, but you do want to point out that maybe some of those rats that we were talking about, them, that occasionally their gleaming little eyes can be seen darting around the village. It's not a blanket of rats or anything, but they're here and they're there, and there's a little more than you would expect to see around a village out in the hills. When the PCs are seeing them, they should probably be seeing them mostly around the outhouses that are near the homes in the village of Dawn's Hollow. Outhouses. Every house, almost, I think they're on the map. I'm pretty sure we got them on the map. Has an outhouse not far from it. Far enough. You don't want your outhouse too close under any conditions, but they're there. And we want to make sure this is how the plumbing is done in Dawn's Hollow. They have outhouses. They don't have indoor plumbing. Outhouses are the thing. And so just about every one of these houses has one. Maybe a couple of really close neighbors might share one. It seems terrible to me for some reason, so I can't imagine that, but possibly that's a situation. One way or another, there's a fair amount of outhouses scattered around, and they are going to become important later, in the most terrible way. So we want to make sure that we get those across in our initial descriptions of the adventure as the players are moving through that village. A couple of other things that I wanted to point out is the rough population of this village. I don't think we addressed this in the modules, and if you just go by the scattering of, homes that are there, figure you got an average probably of 4 or 5 people to each one of those homes. I think we're sitting around, I don't know, I'm just guessing. I could be wrong. Somebody out there is going to do the math and email me that I'm wrong, but I'm going to guess 135, 165 people, something like that. So it's a small village. Remember, this is mixed. Predominantly it's going to be human. There might be a couple of half-elves in there somewhere. There's dwarves, would be the next largest population there. The dwarves and the halflings all sort of live on the southwestern portion of town. The halflings have, what would you call them? They're those undercut homes. They live in the hills. They actually dig little homes into the hillside, and they have nice doorways and things. The dwarves build nice stone houses for themselves, but all those little stone houses, especially on the hill under the tower, which the dwarves own, that's where their brewery is, those houses are all connected by tunnels, and I think most of the people in the village would know that, so that might be some of the gossip that gets out. That allows the dwarves to go from their homes to their work in the brewery without ever having to walk on wet grass. They like their tunnels, so they have them. It's not super extensive, and they're not mapped anywhere in the module. If the DM would like to, he can go ahead and flesh that out to his heart's content, and it could come up. Could end up with a situation where the PCs are trapped down there being hunted by Silas, who is someone I think I'll get to mention him for the first time in this podcast. And boy, that would be a hideous place to encounter Silas. But we don't give you those maps. You would need to make them yourself. From our point of view for the module, they're not necessary. They're really kind of a side thing, and you can make it through without them. The last little point I want to get across in the village is that should your PCs decide they want to take a little wander through the village on their way to the tavern just to get a look around, we have it mapped out with the numbers so you can go through and see, where the blacksmith shop is, which is right down near where the PCs start, kind of down by the creek. There's a gear shop on the other side of the river, I think. There's a lot of, just little shops and houses here and there. But one of the things you will want to point out if they do this is this big tree, one of the bigger trees in the entire village, right by the central bridge. There's 3 bridges in this village that span the creek running through it. And right down there by the center one, kind of where the main sort of market center would be for this village, they have like a little stone standing platform where town criers can come and, wherever they're going to do performances or meetings, group, any village gathering is going to happen down there by this tree, by this bridge. And that bridge is also the village hanging tree. And if the PCs happen to wander past it, they're going to see that it has a fresh rope, a brand new, sparkly clean, nice rope hung up over the hanging tree and recently knotted and affixed to the tree trunk and hung over a branch. The village is preparing for an execution in the morning. That's going to come up in the course of what we discuss about what should be role-played over and rumors and things like that. So a last topic to discuss about the village in general would probably be the crick. It's called the Cutter Crick. And the reason they call it the Cutter Crick, because it rolls out of the mountains from the north, slides right on through town, and it cuts its way down into the ground just a bit. All along this creek, there's 3 to 4 foot sort of embankment, just sort of a drop-off down into the creek. Creek itself isn't that deep. It's only about, on average, probably like 1.5 feet deep. In a deep spot, maybe 3 foot, 3.5 foot, something like that. It has snails and some fish in it that the village fish for once in a while, but nothing extreme. Easy creek to cross. You can slop right across it. You probably wouldn't want to in the winter, but that's neither here nor there. A feature, though, that's going to be important about the creek, it might come up at any point that the adventure is taking place in the village. See, there are going to be these undead incursions, and those are going to make hiding spots and anywhere that your PCs or characters can end up taking shelter kind of gain a premium price. And we want to make sure that we've described a couple of these spots to the players right from the get-go. So if your players happen to go down by the creek, and I think that the path to the tavern winds down fairly close to the creek. It may not go right to its edge, but close enough. Remember that when they first arrive in the village, it's not exactly dark. The sun's pretty much down, but they can still see a little bit. Most of the trees in the village are located down along that creek, and their root systems sort of jut down over the edge of the embankment and in many cases hang out a little ways before they drop down into the creek. That means that all of the trees along the creek are kind of undercut here and there. So some of the trees are already kind of bending over the creek itself. And the root systems form, at least on the trees that are right there on the edges, the roots aren't right at the embankment. They form these kind of little hangovers, hangovers, not like the kind you get on Saturday morning. The roots jut out a ways, couple 3 feet from the embankment before they reach down into the water. And in a lot of cases, like kids might sit on these big old roots and, or jump from the roots into the water or sit there and fish or whatever. It's the kind of place you could sit and rest, but you could also, in a pinch, and this is why it's important to describe these root systems, worst case scenario, you can get in that creek and you can crawl in amongst those roots up against the embankment and have sort of a shield of root over yourself. That might be the difference between life and death for a character dealing with the creek, and there's going to be a lot of fighting in and around this creek at some point approaching very soon in our adventure. So we want to get this crick aspect described as early as we can. If you can't get it right away on the first night, you definitely want to get it described early on the second night. Now, in order to get you set up so that you have the best possible sort of ground base to work from in the village of Dawn's Hollow, I need to discuss, at least take a little bit of time to discuss a few of the more important NPCs that are going to be encountered here and that your players are going to have to deal with. The first one of these, I guess, that we should look at is what's probably our main villain inside the village of Dawn's Hollow at present. Now, the main villain, like the number one head villain of the module, is the necromancer Altharon. He was sent near Dawn's Hollow to visit this old battlefield, to a tomb that's at the old battlefield, go down into this tomb and try to retrieve the body of a long-dead paladin who was killed in the battle that took place on that battlefield. So he heads to Dawn's Hollow in the company of several of his own henchmen. And one of those henchmen is a wererat by the name of Silas. And Silas is a pretty creepy guy. He's skinny, scrawny, missing a few teeth, very nervous, doesn't like clothing. He's a scraggly, sort of homeless-looking, junky-looking, crazy guy. Not all wererats are like this, but Silas is particularly like this because Silas is primarily a rat. He's more rat than human, really. He's used to spending most of his time in rat form rather than in human form. So he's primarily a rat, and he doesn't like the human form very much. When he's in the human form, he's still pretty rat-like and ratish. He can communicate in the human form just, fairly well. He's just not real... how would you describe him? He's just not real good at it. He's very nervous, very chittery, repeats things, makes sing-songy little rhymes. He's a creepy little guy. But he's pretty important because when Altheron arrives in the region of Dawn's Hollow, he sends Silas into Dawn's Hollow to hide and to keep an eye on the village, looking out for any threats that might pose, a real problem for Altheron and his work at the tomb. So that's Silas's job, and he's been in the village for, I think, 3 weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, by the point that the party arrives there. The reason that there are so many rats in the village of Dawn's Hollow is, of course, because Silas is here in the village, and he's been attracting rats toward him because he is not just any old wererat, he's a pretty major wererat, and rats come seeking him out. Once your PCs are actually in the village, not only has Silas been there, he's actually been arrested for the murder of the village priest, and is in the, at the point your players arrive, he's in the jail, the constable's jail, sort of a basement jail, some cages down in the bottom of the constable's house. He's held down there in a cell. Now, Silas is primarily a rat, remember, and as a wererat, he can shift forms between a giant rat, a human, and the hybrid sort of werewolfish-looking, rat, a bipedal rat monster thing with a long tail. Now, Silas has a couple of other little additional quirks to him as far as wererats go, and these are quirks that might be known, at least somewhat, by a party of adventurers that are hailing from the evil side of the coin into this adventure, since those adventurers are themselves working to become members of the Cult of Orcus, full members. They may already have been acquainted with this concept of Minions of Orcus. So a Minion of Orcus is, it's a cultist of Orcus in a way, but it's a title given to lycanthropes like wererats, wereboars, any other sort of special pedigreed, cursed person that has joined the ranks of the Cult of Orcus. Silas is a Minion of Orcus Wererat, and what this means is that he's taken a blood oath, a blood dedication into the cult. He's dedicated his life to Orcus and to the service of Orcus, even so far as to have dedicated his life after his life to Orcus. His body is dedicated to the service of Orcus even after his death. So upon his death, one of the if and when Silas should ever actually die, this dedication that he's taken will ensure that he rises again within 24 hours, 4 to 6 hours. Just roll 4 die 6, and you'll be able to come up with how long it takes him to rise again from the dead. Minions of Orcus, Minion of Orcus Wererats, as long as their body is still intact, once they're killed, they'll rise from the dead as a zombie or a ghast or a ghoul, I think, one of those things, within 4 to 6 hours. If the body is utterly destroyed, that wererat will still rise from the dead, only he'll come back as a specter or a wraith. It's up to the GM how they'd like to do that. Now, Minions of Orcus, Minion of Orcus Wererats specifically, have a few other quirks that we need to look at. First of all, everyone knows about lycanthropes and silver. Most of them are vulnerable to silver. At the point where Silas dedicated his soul to the Demon Lord Orcus, his vulnerability to silver was annulled, was taken away, and it was switched to gold. Now, this makes Minion of Orcus Wererats a little bit tricky to deal with because most people know about the silver trick, but now not all wererats actually are susceptible or vulnerable to silver anyway, but Minion of Orcus Wererats, they are susceptible to gold rather than silver. Cultists of Orcus, being a little more exposed to Minions of Orcus, are more likely to know this. So once your party actually encounters this wererat within Dawn's Hollow, you may want to give them all a wisdom check or something. Now, granted, these guys are trying to earn their wings in the cult, so they're not full members yet, and they, it may come to pass that none of them actually know about this quirk of Minions of Orcus. But I would let them know. They at least should know of them. They just may not know all the secrets of them. But if anybody passes that wisdom check, you'll want to let them know, like, look, the Minions of Orcus have a different vulnerability than silver. You don't even have to specify it more than that if their check wasn't, at least 3 points over what they needed to succeed at the check. If they didn't really succeed at it, maybe don't tell them flat out that it's gold, because that kind of gives away the bank right there, right? In the course of dealing with Silas, though, it's going to be much easier if you know that he's vulnerable to gold, because gold is not only is he frightened of it, if he's pierced with gold, like if he has a gold ring, you take a long sharpened gold stick or something and shove it through his wrist, say, or his Achilles heel or Achilles tendon, so that it pierces his flesh, he won't be able to change forms. Whatever form he's in when that happens, he will be stuck in that form. So that's a way to keep Silas from escaping. Now, Silas is being held at the point that the PCs come into the village in the jail, in a jail cell in the constable's shack. He was discovered just a day or two before outside of the chapel, after the father of the chapel was found to have been killed. Now, the murder of Father Shandley has hit the village like a bomb going off. In the immediate aftermath of the killing, to have found this stranger, this half-naked, reeking, just stinks to the high heaven, skinny, bizarro guy hiding behind some of the tombstones in the graveyard out behind the chapel where the father was killed, they seize him at once. Silas, when he's seized, he doesn't instantly change into a rat or anything. He doesn't like to give himself away as a wererat, but neither is he overly worried when he gets captured or held. He's been captured and held many times. He's been pierced with gold and forced to stay in one state many times. As a matter of fact, his wrists and his ankles, different parts of the skin on his body are scarred up from being pierced with gold and forced to stay in one shape or another, because his fellows in the Cult of Orcus aren't always kind to him. Anyway, so he kind of goes along with this, and they drag him out, and the village wants to, basically kill him and hang him right then and there. It's all that the mayor is able to do to kind of hold them off. There is no way really to get anyone to, think of something like a trial. There's been a lot going on in the village, and you're going to hear about that when I go into the litany of woes, when we get to the part where the players are conversing with the mayor. This village has had a rough few weeks, so by the time they catch Silas, they are just in a murderous mood, these villagers, and they're about to pitchfork him, essentially. However, the mayor manages to hold them off from killing him right then and there, and says that, we're going to keep him, then we'll hang him in a few days. So in the interim, in the sort of intervening time, he's taken and placed in the jail cells. Now, this has all happened just a day or two before the players have arrived in the village. That's why they have a fresh rope on the hanging tree. That's why they're getting ready to hang who they think murdered the father. Now, the truth is that Silas didn't murder the father precisely. He was there when it happened. It's the necromancer Altheron has been trying for a couple of weeks to get into the tomb out at the old battlefield, and he wasn't able to make it in past the doorway. He couldn't get the doorway into the tomb to open. So he went out to some of the surrounding farmlands and tortured some of the farmers that he found out there, trying to find out if they knew the secret. Some of them gave up the fact that Father Shandley and the acolytes here at the chapel in Dawn's Hollow are the ones responsible for taking care of the battlefield and the tomb. So Altheron then went into the village a few days ago, had Silas stand guard outside while he and the other henchmen went into the chapel, and they murdered the priest after interrogating him about how to get into the tomb. Silas, he was there keeping guard outside of the doors. The acolytes were asleep downstairs in the chapel, and by the use of spells, Altheron was to keep the sounds from waking any of the acolytes. So they were, none of them were aware of what was going on while this happened upstairs in the main chapel. The acolytes woke up and found Father Shandley's body in the morning, but by then everything had been done. So speed up a little bit, in the course of digging the grave for Father Shandley, the mayor and one of the acolytes happened to stumble across Silas. Silas is captured, and he's taken, like I'd already told you, to the cells. So let's talk about Silas just a little bit more. We know he's a minion of Orcus now. There's a few other things you need to know about these Minion of Orcus Wererats. First of all, is that once they've dedicated their soul to Orcus, they gain more power because of this. So they already have the powers of shape-changing into the Wererat form, but the Wererats that the Minions of Orcus become are... Wererats have 3 forms. They have the giant rat form, they have their human form, and then they have, I guess what you'd call the hybrid form, the monster wererat, the bipedal monster that you think of when you think of a werewolf or a wererat. So when Silas is in his hybrid monster form, I give him, in the book, I think we detail it for die 3 feet in size, but you can go ahead and just jump that to the max if you'd like. He becomes basically a 9-foot tall, raging monster wererat. They're hideous to behold. They're rather frightening. They turn pure white in color. They have kind of yellowish tails, yellowish ears, yellowish kind of fingers around their claws, yellow around the nose a little bit. But other than that, they're mainly white, and their eyes are kind of a gleamy red, pinkish color. Because Silas is he's always really dingy and dirty, a lot of his white color, of course, is going to get toned down by the amount of mud and bile and poop on him. Poop. There's a word for you. Silas is an outhouse dweller, and that's why outhouses were discussed a little earlier in this podcast. We need to know that because Silas has been hiding out in the village by spending a great deal of his time in the various outhouses around the village. So much so that he's been spotted once or twice near people's outhouses. He's been ran off here and there, and he's even been spotted down in down through the holes in the seats in the outhouse. Somebody heard him. One of the rumors in town is that someone heard something growl down inside one of his outhouses, and he came flying off the seat of his little toilet seat there in the outhouse so fast that he crashed through the door without even pulling his pants back up, and everybody's laughing at him around the village because of that. So Silas, quite at home in the outhouses, and he carries that smell with him everywhere. One of the ways you can detect that you're near Silas is that he has this scent. And it's so strong it can be detected at 30, 40 feet, something like that. Downwind from him is not a good place to be. When they caught him in the graveyard, they threw buckets of water on him, and they've tried to bathe him in the jails, but it just hasn't resulted in much diminishment of his overall terrible scent. So even in his monster form, he carries a smell, and he's not pure white's the wrong color. He's pretty dingy, mucked up because of how much stain is just on his fur, that sort of thing. I guess that makes him even more hideous to behold when he's in his monster form. Wererats don't have the best eyesight, especially during the day. They can't see very far, and that doesn't change for minions of Orcus Wererats. I think 30 feet is about the max distance of his ability to see anything clearly. He can detect gold maybe at double that distance just because he's so scared of it. If he sees anything he even thinks glints like gold, he'll probably run from it straight out. He doesn't make a lot of sense, so they've tried to interrogate him, but he doesn't make enough sense for them to make heads or tails, and he's not really defending himself. So it looks pretty much like he's going to meet the gallows in the morning. Of course, Silas is a wererat, so he's not going to meet the gallows in the morning. By the time the mayor is done telling his tale to the party at the inn, Silas will have already murdered the constables and broken free of the constable's shack. It's likely that your players are going to, after they hear the litany of woes, are going to want to go, because they're going to hear about the capture of Silas. They may be curious enough to try to get the mayor to take them to the constable's shack that night to interview Silas, or at least to meet him and talk with him. For this purpose, in the module, we've mentioned that you want to detail to the players straight out of the gate when they first arrive at the village that they all have one level of fatigue. They've been traveling all day, so they're tired. And that's something that they're going to need to take into account when they're headed to go see, if they want to go to the constable's shack and interview this prisoner. Because, of course, when they arrive at the constable's shack, they're going to find the constable's murdered, and there's a lot of trouble going on there. So they'll investigate the house, but it should be a tense sort of scene where they could run into the murderer at any moment, and they're all at one level of fatigue, which they're going to be suffering the negatives from that. Now, by the time that your players actually learn about Silas and that he's being held at the constable's house, in a cell, chances are that Silas has already escaped. By the time, if your party, fatigued as they are, decides to head up to the constable's house to interview Silas, chances are Silas is going to be out there in the rainy darkness watching them go up toward the house. That doesn't mean that Silas is instantly going to attack them by any means, but it is going to mean that Silas is going to take note of them. Remember that his job in the town is to be on the lookout for threats to Altheron's mission. Silas does one thing correctly, it's going to be fulfill his missions for his master, and he will instantly key into the fact that these possibly heavily armed visitors to the village, newcomers to the village, are definitely possibly a threat. The fact that they're going to the constable's shack makes them doubly so, because he knows they're going to be looking for him. You might want to have your party even catch a sight of him out in the rain somewhere. In a flash of lightning, they might see a dingy, scrawny guy, possibly with the sheet he's stolen from the house he's escaped from, wrapped around him, looking a little ghost-like out in the darkness, not too far from an outhouse, probably. The darkness will fall again, and that guy will be gone in a flash. Silas moves quick. He can change shapes into a giant rat form, which he can just run through the grass and mud, lickety-split, and get away. He can also mill in amongst other rats that have been drawn into the village by him and escape that way as well. His tracks aren't easy to follow because they change in a moment's notice. But once Silas has seen the party, rest assured Silas is going to be interested in your PC party, and they may encounter him before morning comes. One way or another, Silas is going to become a problem for the PCs from about the point that they leave that inn for the very first time. Now, if they arrive at the house, they can investigate the house, look through it. Silas is unlikely to come in and cause them any problems there. But once they've arrived back at the inn, Silas is going to be taking a keen interest in what rooms they might go to. In the form of a giant rat, he might crawl up in the rain on the outside of the window eaves. One thing about Silas is that he has, even though he can't see very well, he has amazing hearing. All wererats do. Silas is exceptionally good. It's his one talent. He can hear through about 2 feet of stone on the other side, as if he were standing in the room on the other side of that wall. So Silas is going to have no problem listening through walls to hear where the party is. He's going to detect people by the sound of their voices, and he's going to remember those voices the way you might remember someone by sight. So Silas is going to become an issue. He is certainly going to become an issue the following morning when all hell breaks loose. And he's one of the main things that the party has to take into account in the village right off the bat and try to deal with. Once it's realized that he's escaped, of course, the whole village is going to panic, and the mayor is going to need help hunting this guy down. So the mayor is going to turn to the most likely candidates for that help, that being the PC party. That's if they go up to the constable's shack. If the party, understands that they're fatigued, hears the mayor's story out, and decides they don't want to go to the constable's shack, then no one's going to know that the constables have been killed and Silas has escaped until morning. The whole village is excited to see Silas hung in the morning. They're all going to be waking up and moving out to try to do that when it's going to become apparent that Silas has escaped. Unfortunately, there's also going to be some other events happening in the morning that might take precedence over that. So Silas's escape is just going to mix into the general panic that's going to consume the village the morning after the party arrives. I want to make sure to give you some of the specifics of Minion of Orcus Wererats, the differences between them and the wererats you'll find in the monster manual, just because it's kind of important. First of all, they're all going to have a 19 strength in their monster form, not in their human form, or the giant rat form, obviously. But while they're in that hybrid monster form, the bipedal rat form, they're going to have a 19 strength, which is a +5 damage. Their bite in that form is going to do 2d4 +3 piercing damage. And any wound they deliver via their bite is going to bleed on the person for D3 rounds. It just means that every round they're going to take 1 more hit point of damage unless they can, bind the wound or hold it shut somehow. So in order to stop that wound from bleeding, they're going to have to press it with their other hand or something, which can complicate how they battle or what they're up to at the moment. It stops bleeding after D3 rounds, but for that time, they're going to lose an additional 1 hit point every round. Their claws do a die 8 +4 damage. 3 times a day, these minions of Orcus Wererats can summon a swarm of rats. And Once per turn, they can use, basically it's a bonus action, although I'm not even sure if monsters have bonus actions, but we're going to give these Wererats one. Once per turn, they can command or direct one of those swarms of rats to go where they want it to or do what they want it to. And they can just kind of do that at will. Well, it costs them a bonus action. They can't do more than one, so I guess it's not at will. We discussed that their vulnerability is silver now. Gold, not silver. Silver does full damage to them, the same way that magical items or, say, radiant things, blessed items, are going to do full damage to a Minion of Orcus Wererat. But the gold is what's going to do the most damage to them. Also, they heal a die 8 hit points per round from any non-gold source. So even if they're harmed by silver or magic, they're still going to heal rapidly from those wounds. It's gold alone that can cause a wound that doesn't heal for them very quickly. It takes them a lot longer to heal from that. And we discussed piercing them with it to hold them in their form. That may become important depending on what your party ends up doing with Silas. If anyone ends up being infected by lycanthropy from attacks by Silas in the course of the game, they become a Wererat, obviously, but they're not going to become the same kind of Wererat that Silas is. Minions of Orcus, they have to have made a point of dedicating their soul to Orcus in order to gain the benefits there. They have to have sort of signed up for Undeath, basically. Which brings us to the next big problem with Silas. If your party does manage to kill him, within 4 die 6 hours after his death, he's going to rise as a zombie, a ghoul, or a ghast. Now, he's going to rise in his monstrous rat form as one of these undead. So he kind of gains this extra, I don't even know what you call it, a wrapper of undeath over the powers that he already had as a wererat. He no longer will be able to infect anyone with lycanthropy, I don't think, but anyone he kills will become a ghoul after that, or a zombie, depending on which you've decided to make him. If his body is completely destroyed, they're smart enough to burn him or do something that, destroys the body in a very complete way, then he'll simply come back as a specter or a wraith. That's up to the GM to decide what they want to do with him. One last thing probably to mention about Silas is that he has an additional contact within the village, and that's going to be the next NPC that we need to discuss. And this is going to be the first main NPC that the characters, depending on what they've done in the village already, they may have met a couple of NPCs, but the first main one that they have to spend any time dealing with or talking to is going to be the main barmaid at the tavern. Her name is Mindra. Now, Mindra is a worshiper of Orcus, and she's neutral evil, and she is related to the necromancer that has come to this village named Altharon. About 11 years before any of this story begins, Altharon was using divination, speaking to the dead, and learned that he might do well to keep an eye on this village. Now, it turns out that he's going to be sent to this village, or at least he volunteers to go here when he hears that Dawn's Hollow is one of the places that his master, Belshazzar, is wanting to send out some of his acolytes or his apprentices to. So Altharon instantly opts for that job, thinking that his divinations had to do with this. Now, due to those divinations that he received long ago, he took one of his thralls, this woman named Mindra, and he sent her to the village to live there. And he's told her to go and sort of bed herself into this village and to wait there for his command. So she's been here in this village for 10 years. She's married the mayor, and she's living here as a normal person. All the villagers love her. She seems like just your normal, average, run-of-the-mill villager. However, she's actually a worshiper of Orcus. She was actually sent here long ago by the necromancer who's now at the village. Turns out that the divination that was given to Altharon is not precisely, it is about Dawn's Hollow, but it wasn't precisely about the mission that he happens to be on. It was actually referring to something more important going on to Dawn's Hollow, which we'll deal with our third NPC. But for now, let's just discuss Mindra. So Mindra hails from the same village that Altharon and his other 2 henchmen do. His henchmen are Cleoth, which is a half-ogre, and his other henchman is named Butcher. And Butcher is just another barbarian villager that Altharon grew up with. All of those people are from the same far northern barbarian tribe, basically, and they've all just sort of, they were all outcast from their village, from their tribe, and they moved south, where they all took up the worship of Orcus, and Altheron ended up sending Mindra off to live in the village of Dawn's Hollow, based on the divinations he received. So it's important to know that they're all related. Now, Silas isn't from the same village. He just happens to be a henchman of Altheron, but the connection is still there. Mindra will aid Silas if she can, and Silas will go to Mindra for aid if he can. They're still trying to keep everything very secret, so they're very careful about these interactions if they have any. And this is something that you don't want to give a lot of hints away about. Mindra won't seem evil in the slightest. She's going to come across as a perfectly normal, everyday sort of barkeep, and she's not going to give away any overt signs. But there are clues around, especially in the tavern. If your players get really nosy and are, picking around through some things, they may eventually find a couple of clues that point towards Mindra's nature. One of the main clues will be that during the undead incursions that happen in the course of our game, this barmaid Mindra is, you don't want to make this, you don't want to make it obvious, but Mindra isn't going to be attacked by any of the undead. Now, both Mindra and Silas have the mark of their master, Altheron. And Mindra, in her case, she wears it, and it is engraved inside of a locket that she's wearing around her neck. If you were to steal the locket, or if one of the player characters did for some reason, or just however they end up with the locket, if they were to look in it, they would see that there's a portrait of her husband, Linny, which is pleasant and nice enough. Well, if you remove that little piece of paper with the portrait of Linny, you'll find engraved Altheron's sigil in the inside of that locket. That sigil is powerful enough to dissuade undead from even seeing Mindra. They can't interact with her. They don't even notice her. They'll move right past her. Silas has a similar mark, but his is branded or scarred on his chest, and it's much larger, and he's not able to hide it, or he doesn't even try. During the undead incursions, the undead will move right past him as if he isn't there. They pay no mind to him at all. They won't bother him. They won't even try to interact with him. That's sort of the power of this necromancer spell that is protecting his minions from any of the undead that show up in the region. And it's a connection that both Silas and Mindra share. So should your players come up with Mindra's locket somehow, they will find that sigil, and that, of course, will be a major clue that there's a problem here. Now, we haven't statted Mindra out in terms of her, NPC scores or anything. She isn't quite important enough that we think she needs them. She is somewhat of a villain because of her relationship to Altheron. Now that Altheron is near the village, she's planning on leaving the village with him. She's going to help Silas if she can, so it may come up that she ends up in direct conflict with the PCs. But Mindra's function in our story is really to serve as a social trap. So she's an attractive woman. She would have a fairly high charisma score, probably in the 15, 16 range, maybe even a 17 if you want to play it that way. And if you're going to use dice rolls and you need to know the bonuses involved. She should get bonuses to things like persuasion and seduction, which I assume would just be the reverse of an intimidation check, or maybe some form of an intimidation check, depending on how you want to play that out. When I describe her in a later podcast as, being kind of down to earth and just trying to get business done when the characters first meet her, and that's true. But in the midst of that, Mindra should, almost from the first time she lays eyes on the party, she will almost instinctually pick out either the easiest target or the target that she thinks she can get her claws into the deepest. In the module, we kind of direct you toward a couple of possible victim types. A paladin or a cleric is a good choice, simply because those types of characters, especially if they're lawful good, maybe playing their roles in such a way that she can add a lot of stress to them if she singles out one of them for her quote-unquote affections, for her attentions. But if you have a not a player necessarily, but you have a character in the party that would be an easy target, possibly a bard or a rogue, someone that she, if she gets turned down by a cleric or a paladin early on, shut down in some way that kind of just, closes her off, she'll turn her sights to the easier targets. These are probably going to be your bards and rogues, that kind of character. Whichever one, she's going to just instinctually move toward the one that she can try to get her claws into. And she's going to try to engage this person in some sort of a lot of flirtation, and she's going to try to kind of pull them off on their own where she can sort of advance those flirtations. Now, Mindra is married to the mayor, Lycanthropy Tilston, and that makes her a danger right away. She's very flirtatious. We describe her as bored, younger than her husband, kind of out in the boondocks. And so, she might just seem like any sort of bored country wife out in the middle of nowhere. She's a lot younger than Lenny, though, so that will play into this somewhat, at least to make it, read more real. But she's actually already involved in an affair with the miller. I think his name is Warwick, and he's kind of a big, kind of dumb guy. He's generally nice, but he has a wicked temper. And while he can, he's the one having the affair, so he can put up with her having a husband, and he doesn't. And Lenny's in no danger from the affair, since Warwick is the one on the wrong side of that equation. If someone else comes in, if this becomes a triangle rather than a dyad, once a third person is involved, this thing's going to get haywire. So you can see the trouble, and this is what Mindra's actually aiming for. If she sees the party as any kind of a threat to her situation, or if she is even worried that they might be there to oppose Altharan, she will definitely reach out and try to latch on to one of the party members. And she's doing it for two reasons. She wants information. She's going to want to try to take that person off, get them to trust her, get as intimate with them as she can, and then try to gain all the information that she can from that person using her persuasion skills and her seduction. But then, secondly, she's going to try to cause trouble for the party, to either slow them down or to impede them within the village. And that can be done in a couple of ways. If it just happens that Lenny should catch her having an affair or, in bed with one of the PCs, well, there goes the help coming from the mayor, and that's a dangerous situation. And worse still, if Warwick should catch wind of this, Warwick is, crazy enough that he will be violent, and that could lead to Warwick being killed by one of the PCs, especially if you have an evil party that isn't going to try to, gently get out of this situation. So her task, as she sees it, will be to impede the party as much as possible and to put them on the outs with the village. The villagers are a pretty tight and cohesive little group, and anything that the party does that really, places them outside of the scope of the village or turns the village against them, especially given the situations and the stresses that the entire village is going to be under and the kind of confinement they're going to be stuck in the course of the adventure, that can become very dangerous for the PCs. If this Mindra social bomb goes off hard enough on your party, if the person you target this at really, just latches on to this Mindra NPC, well, you could blow the whole thing up right there. It's very possible the entire party could end up being killed by these angry villagers as they mob and pitchfork your PCs to death. So that's just some of the fun things that you get to do with Mindra. So keep her in mind when the party first encounters her. She's not exactly going to be leveling the guns at the people right then, but she will definitely be choosing a target, and she will be flirting with that target, and you're going to want to role play it out so that even just from the get-go, right as soon as they're in the inn, Mindra has picked out her target, and she's, advancing on them and touching their shoulder and smiling sweetly at them and talking to them and asking what they need, isolating them and just sort of love bombing them, attention bombing them, and trying to seduce them. The next biggest clue toward Mindra's actual nature would be found in the basement of the inn, should anyone go into that location. The trapdoor leading down into the basement can be found in the kitchens of the inn. People aren't allowed to just wander down there, of course, and the cook, the NPC cook, which is a dwarf, a one-armed dwarf. I think he's got one arm. I don't know. I'll have to check that. they're not just going to let somebody wander down there, of course. But if they, if you got really nosy players and one of them happens to be poking around the kitchens, find that trapdoor and goes downstairs, there is a box amongst all the other kitchen stores and sort of inn supplies that are stored down in the basement that a lot of rats are around. Now, this box, it's a chest and it's locked and it should be stacked on top of a couple other boxes, so it shouldn't be, instantly apparent that the rats are focusing on that chest, but they are in that general area. The cats of the inn they continuously are wanting. I think there's 2 cats in the inn, maybe just one. Anyway, 1 or 2 cats, whatever you want to put in there. Those cats are very interested in getting into the basement as well, and the cook is constantly shooing them away from the trap door. That's kind of a hint for the players to help them find the trapdoor and then go downstairs if they want to. If they open that trapdoor, man, those cats are going to come out from wherever they're hiding in the inn and go shooting downstairs and send the rats that are downstairs in the inn's basement running in all directions. So the chances of spotting this box, they're not real good unless the characters can get down there quickly enough and notice the rats and then notice the cats come charging into the midst of them, scattering them. They may not even know to go toward the chest. Now, the chest is locked. It's not exactly hidden, but it's not exactly, right up there in the front. It's in the back. And if they should happen to open this chest, they're going to find it's full of salted body parts, arms, legs, feet, hands, that sort of thing, ears. The northern tribe of barbarians that both the necromancer, 2 of his henchmen, and Mindra all hail from, is cannibalistic. It's not cannibalistic like evil, like they eat everyone. They sort of ritually cannibalistic. They eat people, I don't know how to make this into a good thing. It's not like it's a pleasant thing that they're cannibalistic. It's definitely part of the evil practices that their tribe partakes in, but it's not... they have their reasons. They're like any real cannibals. They aren't just doing it because they think it's funny. They're doing it because they think it gives them power, or they're using it to gain power over their enemies, or to steal the power from their enemies, that sort of thing, or just to gain blessings from their own family members that have died, that sort of stuff. I know that closed feeding cycles aren't great. You can end up with mad cow disease, but that's not. We're in a fantasy game here. We're going to leave the prions and that sort of thing out of this for now. We're just going to go with straight up sort of ritual cannibalism. Well, Mindra is a cannibal. She's a ritual cannibal, and she does it in secret. And this is her little chest of salted goodies that she's managed to collect. And she, every once in a while, sneaks down into the basement, pops open the chest, and has herself a munch. So that's pleasant. Upon finding this chest full of goodies, should your PCs find it, they may have some questions. Primarily, they'll probably drag that chest up and be like, excuse us, here's a chest full of desiccated body parts, salted nicely. What's this about? It's otherwise it might be, it's obvious. It's not obvious to your PCs who the chest belongs to, but it will certainly be obvious to the cook and to anyone else that works in the inn that has to go down in that storeroom from time to time, and certainly to Linny that chest belongs to Mindra. It's her own chest, and she claims that she has some private affairs from her old life in there, and it's hers, and they leave it alone because they respect her. If your PC should happen to bring it up, pop it open, and show them the goodies inside, there's some people in that inn going to have some questions for Mindra, so that could create quite the dark moment for Mindra, where her 10 years invested in this village will certainly be on thin ice, to say the least. Let's move on to NPC number 3, who is maybe one of the more interesting NPCs in the entire game, and one that the thing about them that makes them interesting should not become apparent, not overtly apparent in the course of this adventure at all, but will become apparent in the long run of the module cycle. And by module cycle, I mean the fourth book. Well, the third book primarily in the series of them. This NPC's name is Claire Orthel, and her and her husband Kessen Orthel have moved to the village of Dawn's Hollow 5 years before our story takes place. They're some of the newest residents in Dawn's Hollow. They run the gear shop, which is called the Orthel's Gear and Assorts. Gear shop. It's just a standard gear shop. They don't have anything real rare or weird. They have a lot of local goods, local tobaccos. Kessen, they're both older. They're 60s, 70s. Kessen is he likes to whittle, so he whittles toys and he sells them in his shop, and sometimes he just gives them to the village children. Wooden knights, wooden swords. He fancies himself a poet and something of a bard, even though he's a first level bard in strict game terms. But he uses his whittling to produce flutes, other little, just small sort of wind instruments that can be made out of the local woods, and he gives those away to the kids as well and uses them to some degree, but mostly he thinks of himself as a poet. Now, Claire and Kessen, in addition to running the gear shop with their grandchildren, they have 3 grandchildren that are here, that they brought to the village with them. They claim that the mother died and the father had ran off before that, and they just kind of picked up stakes in the city they were in and came to have a gentler, easy life out in the boondocks. That's true as far as it goes, but it's not strictly true as far as why they're really here. Now, why they're actually in the village of Dawn's Hollow is they are hiding. Their grandchildren are the children of their daughter Marasha, and she did die, but she didn't die of natural causes. She was murdered in the city that Claire and Kessen are from, and you'll need to place them somewhere in your campaign setting, whichever campaign world you're using, where probably a capital city. It turns out that Claire's daughter Marasha, while she was alive, began having an affair with a king. So it would be the king of whatever country you've put them in. She became a concubine to this king, and she ended up giving birth to her youngest son, Murdock. Now, in the course of this, we don't cover what happened to Marasha's original husband, whether he was murdered in the course of this or not. But certainly Marasha herself was murdered in the course of this. The queen caught wind of what was going on, learned that there had been a child born out of wedlock, and had Marasha killed. Claire and her husband Kessen managed to escape the city with Marasha's children, including the youngest, who's named Murdock. He's 5 years old, and Murdock is actually a prince. So we need to connect him. He's royal blood, and he needs to be connected to one of the kingdoms in your campaign setting. So pick a good one. It shouldn't be just a throwaway kingdom. It should be one with some real juice behind it. The threat to Murdock's life is real, and his claim on a throne may be real as well. He may be the firstborn male child of that king, something like that. And his existence depends on the secrecy that Claire and Kessen can afford him. And that's why he's out here in the middle of nowhere. Now, this is going to become important in the course of our game, because the main villain is Altharon's master is searching for a cauldron called the Sun Killer Cauldron. And this Sun Killer Cauldron is a large, big black cauldron, which is a magical relic. And he intends to use this to seize the power of the sun and to put the sun out. In order to do this, eventually what is going to be required is he's going to need a sacrifice that he can make into the cauldron, and it has to be a royal sacrifice, and it has to be an innocent sacrifice. So Murdock is going to become, unfortunately, sort of top of the bill for that. Now, this whole backstory of the princeling Murdock and Claire and Kessen may or may not come up in the course of your game at all. The prophecy that we talked about, Altharon having received earlier, actually was aimed at this child Murdock. It was not aimed at what is currently being undertaken by Altharon in the village. It was more importantly aiming at this kid. The details of this story are covered in a journal that Claire Orthel keeps with her. Now, when things go haywire in the village, Claire, Kessen and their grandchildren. They're going to leave the gear shop and they're going to come to the inn and take a private room in the inn. Claire, in her past life, was something of a wizard. She's a third-level wizard, and Kessen is actually a third-level thief who's trying to be a bard at this point, but he's kind of sucky bard, but he's a fairly adroit thief. Claire keeps the fact that she's a wizard fairly secret as well. I don't know that maybe one or two people in the village or even in the surrounds might know this fact about her. Maybe no one does. She's trying to hide herself as thoroughly as she can from her past. But if she sees other spellcasters in the PC party and she thinks she can help them, she might approach them in secret and offer to give them some spells from her spell book. This would be the first hint that the party would receive that this older couple are not exactly what they seem to be. They hesitate to use their skills either as a wizard or a thief in any context where they don't absolutely have to. And if they do, they try to keep that very much on the sly, very much hidden. So if they have to pull any of their tricks out of their bag, they're going to be in a tight spot. And that's the only way that they'll do it. So that's just kind of one of those secrets that you will have as a GM that you kind of need to hang on to. Yes, there's a way for the players to find it out. No, you don't necessarily need them to or even want them to, but it is there. It is detailed there, and you need to kind of hold it kind of out in the back. Should circumstances just arise that one of your players, being a pain in the butt, steals Claire's satchel or something that contains her spell book, it will also contain this journal, and very shortly thereafter they'll be able to learn the true nature of Murdock. Now, if your PCs are evil PCs, this information is going to become vitally important to them in the long run of this campaign series, because not only are they trying to kind of stop Master Balthazar's faction from gaining these, what he's after here in the village, which is the body of this knight, but in the long run, they're going to want to steal this cauldron, this Sunkiller cauldron from him as well. And stealing it, the masters, the PC's masters, are going to want to use it. And the way that they would be able to use it best is if they have the proper sacrifice for it, which is going to bring you into the hairy situation of your PCs possibly having to come back to this village in search of poor little Murdock. With the major NPCs covered, I want to step back once again and cover some of the more minor NPCs that might come up in the course of the adventure. These may or may not come up. And primarily these would come up if you're looking to pad out your party at all. If you don't, maybe you only have like 2 or 3 players and they're going to need a little more blood on the field, or they're going to need a few bodies that they can throw into the mix to help them. There are 2 primary NPCs that we include in the story that you might want to think about mixing into your party, even if you have enough characters already. You don't have to, of course, but these would be good ones, at least useful ones that you could put in if you have like 4 or 5 player characters and you think maybe just one more NPC would be important. We give a couple of good ones in the book version of the module. There's going to be a wood elf that shows up on the second day there's going to be the thorn walls are going to sweep in and surround the village, right, shutting off access to the trails and roads all around it. The only way in or out of the village at that point is going to be along the creek that runs through the village. When this first happens, no one's really going to know that it's maybe even possible to move along the creek. Nobody's going to be thinking about that. They're just going to feel like they're completely shut off. But some point on the second day after that Thornwall incursion has happened, after the Thornwall has surrounded the village, maybe around the middle of the day or so, you would have one of these wood elf rangers that are in the region kind of come tromping up the Cutter Creek from the south into the village. Now, he's a wood elf, so instantly the villagers are going to be a little bit not pleased with him, and they pretty much already think that the wood elves have done all of this trouble in everything that's gone wrong. They're blaming on wood elves, so no one's going to be overly happy to see a wood elf ranger come slopping up the creek into the village. But your PCs might, because this is some help, right? They can turn to this guy and get him on their side, and he will happily go with them to the shrine. More than that, if your PCs haven't figured out yet, if they haven't found, there's some clues that the general villagers don't know that there's a tomb under the shrine on that battlefield outside of town. They know that there's a shrine there. Everybody knows that, and everybody knows pretty much the story of the battle that took place there. But the fact that there's actually a tomb under the shrine, that's kind of been lost to time. Now, the priests at the chapel, they all know that. The old father of the chapel, Shandley, the one that was murdered by the time your PCs arrive, he had kind of taught his acolytes not to talk about it much. They just don't mention it. They found that one of the best ways of sort of keeping tomb robbers from going to the tomb is basically not to talk about it at all. The most of the locals in the region, the hill region around Dawn's Hollow, it's been so long since anyone's mentioned this tomb that most people just don't even know it's there. Occasionally, the priest or the acolytes would screw up and call the place a tomb. So people have heard them say that, but they generally just think that they were referring to, the fact that there are so many people killed there that it's basically a tomb. There's so many bones that pop up every time it rains that they're like, yeah, it's a tomb. But no, there's actually like a catacomb tomb underneath the shrine. And the priests have been protecting it just kind of by not talking about it, not mentioning it. It's not a secret that they're holding exactly. They just have not talked about it, sort of an omission in their communications with anybody. So if your player characters, come up to one of the acolytes or the priest, and I guess Acolyte Theta will be in charge at the point that the PCs are in the village, if they confront her about the tomb, there's several places they can find out about it. If they've picked up the book, it's called Heroes of Bone Dust Hill. If they found that book in the library at the tavern and have been reading through it, that book pretty explicitly explains that a tomb is underneath the shrine. There's also hints of the tomb's existence. For instance, there's a tapestry in the chapel that depicts knights carrying bodies up the hill, Bone Dust Hill, toward the shrine, and a priest at the top of the shrine kind of kneeling down, touching the ground. Now, they would only be carrying bodies up there if they were going to be doing something with them. What they're going to be doing is taking them down under the shrine into the tomb. So there's a few hints at that, but that doesn't mean that it's, very overt. However, the Wood Elves know perfectly well that there's a tomb under that shrine. Many of the Wood Elves partook in that battle, and they're still alive, and they know that a tomb was built there, and it's not something that they try to hide at all. They, whenever they talk about the shrine, they talk about the tomb mainly. So this Wood Elf ranger that shows up, his name is Jaelix Amasar. This is if you have the book. Again, it's different in the PDF, and I'll explain that in a second. He's just a third-level ranger. He's there looking for the Wood Elves that came through the town a few days prior to the party. So he's going to be interested in tracking them down, and he will be more than happy to head out to the shrine with the PCs. And, it's a third-level ranger. He's, going to be okay in combat, so it's a pretty good NPC to throw in the mix. If you have the PDF, the character that is detailed in the PDF is a half Wood Elf druid by the name of Nasarra Etheon. And she's a third-level druid, Circle of the Moon druid. She's very beautiful. She's the half-sister of the elf that was in charge of the troop that came through the village a few days before the PCs got there. And that elf's name was Jaelix. So she's initially looking for her sister, but once the thorns sort of sweep into the entire region, this thorn wall that surrounds the village, she's also very concerned about this. She knows it's been caused by dark magic. She wants to find the source of it, and she wants to, correct it, get rid of these thorns that have swept through the hill region, because she knows it's, completely unnatural. So she has two driving purposes: to sort of move at least toward the battlefield and the shrine, if not the tomb underneath it. And she's also aware of the tomb underneath it. So if your PCs aren't, she may inform them, there's something going on at the shrine and possibly down in the tomb under it. So once the undead start sweeping into town, down the river from the north, or down the creek from the north, those Wood Elves are going to point that out too. Like, look, these these undead must be coming from the battle site. Possibly they're coming from the tomb under the shrine. So that will be an easy way for even if your PCs don't want to take these NPCs with them or have them join the party, it's a good way to get the information about the tomb out to the players. Then they need to have that information before they head out there. Again, there's a secret to opening the tomb. Now, the Wood Elves do not know the secret to getting into the tomb, but they probably know that the tomb is locked via some secret. So if you're using this as the mechanism to deliver that information to your PCs, make sure you get that across too. Worst case scenario is your PCs, okay, there's a tomb, let's head out, and we're going, and they all leave to the north and they head for the tomb, and they battle their way up there and battle their way up the old bone dust hill and get to the shrine, and then discover they don't know how to open this tomb. There's a secret to opening it, and that secret is also hinted at all around the village in several places. In this, a lot of sunrise symbols going on in the stained glass of the chapel, for instance. That tapestry we discussed earlier shows a priest up on top of at the shrine, kneeling and touching the ground, and it's at sunrise, right? There's a sun coming up in the background on that tapestry. All of these things are sort of hinting to how it is that the tomb is opened, but your PC, you've got to make sure that you describe these things without giving away that secret right away. Now, the priest of the chapel, he would have always known the secret, and kind of sensing his own doom and that something was going wrong, he told the secret of how to get into the tomb to Acolyte Theta. The Acolytes, while they won't have, if they're approached and asked about the tomb, they won't have a problem talking about the tomb. They just don't want to do it in front of the other villagers. Like I said, it's not like they're trying to hold this secret away from people. They just aren't necessarily trying to advertise it, so they'll try to talk quietly about the existence of the tomb if they have to. None of the Acolytes have been in the tomb, and only Theta knows the secret of how to open the tomb. Now, in the course of the story, Theta, she'll probably die at an event on the second day or third day that the PCs are in the village. And before she dies, she will pass that secret on to the acolyte called Niles. And once Niles knows the secret of how to enter the tomb, it may be that the PC, you see, these acolytes aren't going to hand the secret over to anyone. They're sworn not to give it to anyone. If you just happen to have a PC in the party that is a paladin or a priest of the sun god, then they might be convinced to give the secret to them. But if I were you as a GM, I would have it that they don't want to give that secret to anyone. And since they take, an oath to hold that secret, they aren't going to turn it over. They will, however, open the tomb for the party to get them in. So it might be that the PCs, look, Niles, if you're not going to give us a secret, you're going to have to come with us to the tomb. Now, this is kind of the ideal situation. One of the other NPCs that you want to involve in the course of your story is Niles, Acolyte Niles. He is a coward, and he's all sorts of fun. We even include a chart for him on every time he sees a new undead, what's going to happen, whether he's going to run or scream or grab a hold of one of the PCs and not let go of them, and all kinds of craziness can go on with him. He's a terrible fighter, but he's an excellent healer, and he gets bonuses to his healing spells. And as a matter of fact, he can cast healing spells almost all the time as part of one of his domain powers or something. So we really think it's a good idea to have Niles go along with the PCs to the tomb. If you have an evil party and they have to drag along this bumbling lawful good monk with them, oh my gosh, it's going to make it so much more fun for you as a DM, because you can just annoy the hell out of your PCs with this guy. He's an important NPC. He's one you probably pretty much want to come along, no matter whether they take any of the other ones, whether they take, the druid Nasarra or the ranger Jaelix. Those two aside, Niles is he's destined to go, and we hope that you'll include him. Now, we've also thrown in just a couple of other NPCs. Smaller ones are not quite as important. They're just in case your PCs need to hire on some hirelings, just need to hire on some extra swords or something. In the book, we give you 2 dwarves that would be happy to go along. One of them's named Largrin Silverforge. He'll take a little bit of convincing to get him to go along, and he's going to want to be paid a portion of the treasure. He wants 20 gold pieces up front, I guess, and at least half a share of any treasure found. And he wants a guarantee in writing that will be given to his children in the event he doesn't return. The other dwarf that we outline here is Devrissa Highhill. She works in the brewery, that big tower on the outside of the town there. Well, it's in the town, but it's kind of to the south of the town up on a hill. She works there, but she's always up for an adventure. She'll be more than happy to go. Her only quirk is that she can get really hot-headed, and she'll just won't even hesitate to jump into a terrible situation. So she may not be long for the course of the adventure if you take her along. If you have the PDF, the 2 extra NPCs that we give you in there are Minx Dardinion, I think is his name. Yeah, Minx Dardinion. He is a male halfling of the stout variety of halflings, 68 years old. He's a second-level thief. He lives with his elderly parents there in the village. He's not well liked in the village. He's not well trusted. He spent a lot of time traveling. Well, not a lot of time, but some time in his youth traveling, and he's made his way as a thief, and he's still much of a thief, and everyone knows it. He's kind of a dark soul for a halfling. He's not your happy-go-lucky halfling that they try to hoist on everyone. He does love his pipe smoking. That's his only, kind of homage to actual halfling life. But he suffers badly from nightmares. He can wake up in the middle of the night screaming and shouting, so that can cause chaos. That can also attract, unwanted attention, that sort of thing. He's a second-level thief, but he's got enough skill to make that work for him. The other NPC that we list is a local guy that does odd jobs around town. His name is Jath Oathsman. He gets along with everyone in the village pretty well. The village likes him. Jath is excellent with a spear, and he's always up for an adventure. He's tall, like 6'4". He's got a much broken nose, kind of a heavy brow, and he's good with a spear and a shield. So he'll hire on, for like 5 gold pieces and a share of the treasure found, something like that. Pretty simple wants from Jath. He isn't gonna, request too much. So that's just a little spilling of the extra NPCs that are in here. These are all kind of optional ones that may or may not become involved in the, more deeply in the course of the adventure. You can use them also as backup characters. If you have these NPCs along with the PC party, then if one of their characters die, they can pick up one of these NPCs and play them from that point forward if you'd like. If you happen to have both the book and the PDF, and some of you do, I know, use any of these. You got all 4 of them. It's not like you only have to choose a few to use. You got the whole little panoply of them. So that covers, I think, the bases of the main NPCs we need to worry about. From here, we can finally go back to the inn and pick up where we left off in session 2, and take us back to how things should progress in the inn, how they're going to find out the story of the village, how your players are going to find out the story of the village, and how the adventure is going to progress come morning on the day after they've arrived.
Hey everyone, Ashiel here, and if you enjoyed this podcast and would like to hear more, you can visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/MadHermitGames. In addition to our free walkthrough podcasts, we will be offering subscriptions which will include new dungeons, storylines, NPCs, as well as other exclusive content on a monthly basis. We look forward to hearing from you, so please consider joining our Discord channel, Mad Hermit Games, where you can connect with us, other DMs, and players. You can also email us at madhermitgames@mail.com, and all the links will be in the description. Thanks for listening.